Final Fantasy VII Remake was a game that was given an impossible task to recreate a game and all the memories that people have and make it feel like it's something substantial while also new at the same time. It's the game that we were all looking for, but the one we were really looking forward to was the sequel. So here we are, some 3.5 years later, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is on the horizon, and we got to play it. And now, after spending a bit of time with the game, I ultimately understand that Final Fantasy VII Remake was the game to step up to the plate. But it might be Rebirth that hits the home run. Let's go! Again, before we jump into this, a big shout out to Square-Enix. They gave us the opportunity to check out the Tokyo Game Show build of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth a little while ago, and I couldn't be happier to be considered among this and amongst all the other journalism and gaming peers. This is easily one of my favorite franchises. Final Fantasy VII Original is one of my favorite games ever, and I was thoroughly impressed with the majority of Final Fantasy VII Remake. So let's talk about it piece by piece. I'm going to make this a general impressions video and then make a couple others that go over some of the more intricate details of what you can expect, because there is an absolute metric ton to talk about from the 2 demos that were available. So let's talk about the 2 demos. The first one is a portion of the flashback sequence, the story that we hear of Cloud talking to the rest of the party in Calm. And this is a recollection of events that happen in Nibelheim, which is the biggest core contributor of the plot of Final Fantasy VII, the events of Nibelheim. Yeah, it is essentially you and Cloud and younger Tifa all going up to the reactor, and purposely serves as the tutorial, at least the part that we were playing, for the beginning of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So, how could we expect this sequence to play out? Well, funny enough, this portion of the demo plays out fairly similar to Final Fantasy VII Remake. It's pretty linear, it's dungeon-like, and it is getting you acclimated to the controls of the characters. The fun part about it is that, yeah, you get to control as Sephiroth. He has his own move list. He has his own unique abilities that I don't think are present on any of the other characters. And you also get to play as Cloud, who has a revamped move list from the original Final Fantasy VII Remake. And it starts to introduce some new mechanics. You get to see synergy stuff. Going over some of the little things, though, I did kind of enjoy this as an introductory piece. There are some moments where there are puzzles. There are a lot of like exploration moments where you're exposed to how the game functions, which is verticality. And yeah, there's a new scaling button that characters have. I think it's circle, where you can climb up walls. Anything that is approximately like chest high to like head high, you can scale up it. And this leads to some pretty fascinating moments where you're like, oh, I usually would not be able to get to this thing even though my face is looking directly at it. Luckily in this game, yeah, you can actually climb walls, which is fun. This is just the beginning of what is technically possible in the game later on. It ultimately is serving as an introduction to, you know, this Nibelheim sequence and how the game works. There's portions of walls that are painted like yellow, very Horizon-like, that let you know that, oh, that's scalable, you can go up and down that. And then some kind of enjoyable puzzle sections where you gotta look at the environment, figure out what to do, and then vacuum up some loose Mako funk that is preventing you from moving further. Things that weren't present in the original, mind you, but just getting you used to the fact that, yeah, dungeons are going to provide some of these sort of engagements as you go through. The fun part is that, yeah, a lot of this plays out very similar. The dialogue of characters is extremely similar to the memories that Cloud has in the original Final Fantasy VII, and there is just a little bit more, you know, camaraderie before these characters. You get to see Cloud and Sephiroth have a little bit more moments, as Cloud is obviously new to all this stuff in this sequence. It's his first big soldier mission, and Sephiroth is the, you know, war-hardened veteran that is sort of assisting him and sees, like, the fact that he's very aspirational and wants to help Cloud out in a variety of ways.
Magic sure is weird.
So this is echoed very much throughout combat, and you hear about this in their gameplay. When you're actually utilizing these characters together, they tell each other that they're going to team up, that, like, you know, follow up with attacks here. It's very cool, and it's just setting up the fact that, yeah, these guys were friends before. So the funny part about it, what's different is that, yeah, they moved the Materia Keeper boss, and I think it's called something different. It's called like the Materia Guardian. Normally this boss fight was not present in the original game, but now is kind of setting up as the tutorial guard scorpion of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So it's getting you used to the fact that, hey, if you want to approach characters, you have to use like Sephiroth's warp ability. He gets to warp around. And you also learn some pretty fascinating things about combat, more on the lines of you don't need dodge anymore. There's no more dodge materia. Characters can freely dodge with the circle button in combat now, which is quite nice. So it's great, man. It's a great introductory sequence. I'm just looking forward to getting the entirety of it, because this is just one small piece of the COM flashback, and it's genuinely good. It fixes a lot of the issues that some dungeony parts of Final Fantasy VII Remake already have, where they meander a bit too long and don't really introduce new things to you. And even in this small portion, which is acting as tutorial, it reminds me a lot of the original Final Fantasy VII Remake and that first mission, and how wonderfully polished that is.
Enough of this.
Got ya.
Take it from here. Nice work.
I know you guys, and I know that everybody that's watching this video is excited to hear about the COM flashback and story stuff, which there isn't a ton that's in here that really can be deciphered from the demo. But the really important one is Demo 2. Essentially puts us right in front of Junon Harbor and a little bit of an explorative area. And I say a little bit because comparatively, it's actually pretty small. But weirdly enough, for what they set up and what they give you in this zone, it is very mitigated. Like, it is small. There's borders, there's demo borders all over the place that say you can't go here. But even with that, you could spend 40 to 45 minutes in this area kind of doing everything. And the funny part about it is that I got an opportunity to go through this demo several times. And every single time I found something new, I discovered something different I could do, and I was sort of surprised that this was possible. I can't tell you how excited that makes me. So let's talk about it just a little bit. It's an area right outside of Junon, and going to the town that is under Junon Harbor, where you eventually are going to fight the boss fight, you know, save Priscilla. All that stuff is still there, which is great. But what's more important was what happens outside of that zone. And yes, you have access to all your characters. You immediately get access to a chocobo. You immediately get hints that from characters right off the bat that things like Fort Condor exist, and they are out there.
There's a story about a great condor said to roost on an island's abandoned reactor, though there's no longer any way to reach the isle, or at least none that I'm aware of.
They just finally reclaiming what Shinra stole.
But they are inaccessible, and they're different, and they've been moved from what was the game before, because you go to Fort Condor in the original Final Fantasy VII before Junon Harbor, or you could. So already there's some pretty fascinating things, and yeah, as you get down, you're immediately distracted by things in the environment. Like, you immediately see, oh, I can pick stuff up. Wait a minute, there's these little miniature chocobos that are all over the place. Like, wait a minute, they're leading me to checkpoints. There's another chocobo farm. My God, like, and then you get to synergy abilities and your characters, and then you start looking at the menus, and it becomes daunting. There is so much stuff that is a completely different game that was Final Fantasy VII Remake. You get a little bit of this taste of what Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is, and even this small, truncated zone of what the game is even going to offer gives me enough that I was still exploring things and, you know, digging stuff up with chocobos and doing all of this wild stuff that I was genuinely surprised by. There's a ton of ways to engage with this environment, and I want to go over it because it deserves its own video. There are so many individual unique details that you can do in Rebirth that it's worth going over every one and describing how it works. But just going over the mechanical stuff, it's great to have characters like fighting with each other, right? It's great to see team up attacks of these characters working together. The way you utilize them is also super smart. You use your ATB charges and it contributes to them, building them up, where each character can now execute big team-based flashy moves. They gave you flashy moves to work with other characters that costs no ATB as well. So there's no longer moments where you're just sitting in fights waiting to block things or attack things if you can't. You actually get to have actions at all times that contribute to your ATB gauge. It's great, dude. And not to mention, going around the environment and discovering things is so much fun. Like, I was inherently a little worried. There was some skepticism on my part where I felt that there just might be larger zones similar to Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 1, and that we're going to get something kind of like that, where the exploration might be relegated to just finding a box here or there, and that just might be it. But it's not that, dude. Like, there's a lot of stuff that you can do with this world and this environment, and the wonderful thing about it is that by the time we go to the town to save Priscilla and, you know, fight the boss fight that happens there, and it plays out almost identical to the original boss. Like, there's a dolphin, it helps you out, and your team members get trapped in little water bubbles that you have to crack and break just like the original game. It's great, dude. And I don't want to go on much further because there are so many minor changes, like I said, in the combat, in the way the game functions, in materia, in all of this stuff that is wildly different from Part 1, that almost deserves something outside of this general impressions video. All I can say is that from a Final Fantasy VII fan, I have to go out of my way to find issues with the demo. And I was told by the developers that this build of the game has been around for quite a long time. So even if this represents, you know, a staple, a pinnacle of their development that has been around for a long time, it's ridiculously impressive. I have to compare this to the only other big effort that Square-Enix has with open world games, and that's Final Fantasy XV. And it is such a drastic difference of what you could do in the world of a game like Final Fantasy XV compared to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And there's a variety of reasons for that. 15 was a different game throughout many points in its development, eventually, you know, hovering around an open world game in the end. But as much as that game touted we're the big open world Final Fantasy, this one seems to be the one that's actually executing on all those ideas. I always say this problem that 15 has, even though I really enjoy that game, there's a couple of towns and a metric shit ton of gas stations, and that's about all you get. And even in this like little bit, this little small portion of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, I already did enough exploring in this small, heavily mitigated demo zone that is comparable to the amount of like offbeat story path exploring. And that's all we're really doing. Like, you could just run straight to Junon Harbor and go right into the boss fight within like a few seconds. You could take 30 seconds to run there if you want, but if you simply just go left and start looking at all the points on the map, all the different like points of interest that the game gives you, it tells you all this stuff. Hey, there's a lot of world here. If you want to go check it out, it is completely missable. And I love that, because it was the stuff that was even, I think, more fun in some situations than just going straight through the story stuff. And I have to think the influence of the way some other games work, like even Breath of the Wild to Elden Ring to like the Xenoblade series and the way other big RPGs work, has like an impact here. I don't know if the rest of the game is going to be like this, but if this little chunk of outside Junon Harbor is what we have to work on, then dude, I can't even imagine how big this game is going to be. I can't even imagine if they can replicate this across the entire world of Final Fantasy VII. And even to look at the map to see that like, oh, we're looking at just this, and we're only on this continent in this map. Looking at just a portion of this continent on this map, and the explorable part that I spent 45 minutes in each playthrough is like 1/20th of it. I can't wait, man. It's almost hard to put into words that I really think Final Fantasy VII Remake was the game that set them up. It's the game that proved that they can do this. We have an idea, we have a vision, we're taking the story in a crazy direction potentially, but the way the game functions and works, and the way combat is, and the way dialogue is, and the way the entirety of the game theory of what a Final Fantasy VII Remake could be was executed in part 1. But it was done for a reason, so all those systems could essentially fly. They can fly in the next game, which is the one I think needs to hit the most. This is going to be the game that is going to get people to really change their minds. And I feel that this demo has such a profound impact that the only other demos that have really left me with just like awe and wonder in terms of like what I can do and what we're going to be able to do with these systems probably goes back all the way to Resident Evil 4. And I have to think of the first time we played the Resident Evil 4 GameCube demo. And it was like, dude, yeah, I got that feeling. I got that feeling again that like, I just want to go through it again and see what I can do differently, and again and again and again. So, ultimately, my impressions are pretty positive. If you can't tell, I'm trying my best not to gush and freak out, and I'll be able to do so on the live stream when we eventually go over all this footage and stuff and have a chance to just freely chat about it. But I'm fairly confident in what Rebirth is going to be as a game in total. I think this game is going to be massive, and it seems that they're not afraid to talk about that. It also is something that I have to mention here. I had to go out of my way to find things I didn't like about it. And it's technically technical issues that will get fixed. The game does run in a performance mode that is 60 FPS, but was not optimized, so we could not record footage of it. It didn't look like it was running in like a super high crisp fidelity either, so it definitely still is in the works. So most of the capture we have is from the graphics mode, which is something close to 4K and 30 FPS. But I can say I did play through both modes, even though I don't have footage of both of them. The 4K 30 ran 30 almost the entire time, it felt like. The 1080 60 or whatever it ends up being in the final version did end up feeling pretty much like 60 FPS the entirety of the time. And again, they're working on that stuff. We'll probably have a better idea of how it functions because the game is still a bit away. I leave with a pretty damn amazing impression, and you really realize that this is a big deal for Square, and this is the game that possibly Final Fantasy 15 always wanted to be, and then, you know, eventually became. This is the one that probably is going to hit the home run of the entire Final Fantasy VII Remake franchise that exists now. And I can't wait for you guys to play it. I can't wait for it to eventually be playable in some way so I don't sound crazy again and just gushing about all this stuff. It does so much for me. I have something to describe in just a brief moment before I make 2 more videos talking about combat and exploration. There was this moment where I was sitting with Simmons and we were looking at like a viewpoint, and it was the ocean and there was an island out there and there was a busted ship on the island, and we're like, dude, there's like a pirate ship out there. What the heck is going on? Like an ancient ship that was just like discarded because Shinra made their big stuff on the mountain. We had this moment where it'd be like, dang, it'd be so great if we could just swim out there. And then we scaled the rocks, we went down to the edge of the water, and then we watched every single party member jump into the water, and we started swimming to this island in the middle of nowhere. And then there were items on there, and we were rewarded for our efforts and the idea to go out there. And I think in that moment, me and Simmons looked at each other and were like, dude, this game is going to be something special.